We are living in very uncertain times at the moment. Indeed, we have been living in very uncertain times for these past 2 years. COVID came out of the blue and changed all our lives. If not forever, it certainly seemed like that for many of us. Then President Putin changed our world and left us feeling very uncertain about the future as he invaded the neighboring sovereign state of the Ukraine. As I typed this on Wednesday, there seemed to be no likelihood that a peace agreement could be reached. And all because of the vanity of a single man, a bully, who seems to believe that he's almost messianic, whilst most of the rest of the world sees him as having lost the plot, or even worse, mad. Traditionally, during Lent, we journey with Jesus in the battle that he engages in with the power of evil and sin. Starting on Ash Wednesday with his encounter with the devil in the wilderness, as the devil seeks to persuade Jesus to turn away from the path upon which he was born to tread. Then, during Holy Week, we travel the path that Jesus took from his triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday to the events of Maundy Thursday and Good Friday. The way of the cross, crucifixion, death, and burial. But his journey doesn't end at the tomb. It starts up again at that same tomb, when on Easter Sunday we, with the disciples, discover the glorious truth that the tomb is empty. The truth that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. Resurrection and glory, not just for Jesus, but also for each one of us who put our faith and trust in him who is the way, the truth, and the life. It's never easy to stand up to evil in the world. There will always be a price to pay. And Jesus paid the ultimate price of death. And our hearts go out to the people of the Ukraine in their present battle against evil, as many of them pay that ultimate price of death. We can feel so helpless at such a time as the present. I know that many of you are using this Lent resource book, the Live Lent course, entitled Embracing Justice. Little did the author of this book, nor the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, little did they realize just how apt this course was going to be. I don't know about you, but as I have used this day by day, I have to admit that in the light of the events that surround us, I'm not finding it an easy course to study. We began on Ash Wednesday with a quote from Isaiah 55. "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake their way, and the unrighteous their thoughts. Let them return to the Lord, that he may have mercy on them, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon." Not easy to believe when we go through the events of the present time. And in week 1, we centered our thinking on the theme of Exodus and liberation, when the action for the week was, try and watch or read the news every day. Is there one group or one person's pain or oppression which stands out? Can you think of one practical action you could take, says the author, to stand in solidarity? A letter, an email, a donation. That week, a number of us joined in the prayer online that was being organized by the church in Europe. And joining us was the chaplain from Moscow and the church warden from the church in Kyiv. We stood with them in prayer. I suppose in many ways we could add to that question that the author posed about how can we stand with them. We can now add, or the offer of a home to a Ukrainian refugee family. Then last week our theme was building communities of justice. And in the introduction to that, the author wrote, "The story of Exodus is not just a story of liberation. It goes hand in hand with the birth of a new community, shaped for justice and the flourishing of all with a set of laws for everyday living." Again, I have to say that when this was written by Isabel Hamley, she could never have foreseen the events in Ukraine. And this week, the title is "When Justice Fails," where truth is suppressed and force is used to quell any form of political dissent. And now, as we begin another week, the theme for tomorrow and onwards, justice as encounter. Justice as encounter. In our gospel passage that Sonia has just read to us, we heard of two people who encountered Jesus. Encounters that were to lead to healing and restoration. Tomorrow and Tuesday, we'll be invited to look a little deeper into those two encounters. In the case of the woman who'd been hemorrhaging for 12 years, the need was hidden. In the case of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter, her suffering and her need and her death was there for all to see. Two very different people, both of them in need of healing. In the case of the nameless woman, Jesus ensures that her healing is made public. At first sight, we could be excused for thinking that Jesus was a little insensitive in drawing attention to her. But no, Nothing could be further from the truth. She had spent all that she had in trying to find a cure. Her affliction was well known. It had cut her off from her community. It had cut her off from worshipping with the people of God. She was unclean. She not only needed healing physically, but she also needed to receive a reversal of her being ostracized. She needed to be welcomed back into that community. If she was of little consequence to the crowd, then Jairus was at the other end of the social scale. But this time, Jesus sends the crowds away. He gives Jairus and his family the privacy that they deserved. And as we go through this coming week, as we use this book, which has begun to touch a nerve in all of us so deeply, as we go through this coming week, we will meet with other people who in their own very different ways teach us about encountering Jesus. On Wednesday, it's the story of the rich young man who encounters Jesus, and how Jesus asks, what does he need to do? He asks Jesus, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? To which Jesus responds in a very challenging way: to love your neighbor as yourself. And the young man then says, but who is my neighbor? The answer to which Jesus gives in what we now refer to as the parable of the Good Samaritan. We know it so well. On Thursday, it's the story Jesus tells of the contrast between the Pharisee, who sees himself as righteous, is actually simply self-righteous, and the tax collector, who considers himself to be a sinner beyond salvation, but who is, says Jesus, the righteous one in the eyes of God. And then on Friday, we shall read of the gospel account of the woman caught in adultery, of the crowd baying for her blood, and the now famous response of Jesus: he who is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone. Encounters. Next weekend, we find Jesus at the center of the Pharisees' condemnation for eating with tax collectors and sinners. I hope you will continue to use this book each day of this week and read of those encounters with Jesus, encounters with God, justice as encounter being the theme. So to sum up, I want to suggest that encountering Jesus in our lives is as life-challenging and life-changing as it was for each individual or group of people who encountered Jesus face to face and of whom we shall read about this week. And that encounter must result in our understanding of how justice is to be lived out in our lives and in the lives of society, here in Biddulph and throughout God's world. Now, this book is not an easy book to use. It speaks to our society and our world today. Stick with it. Stick with it. Because as I end, I want to give you a quote from today's passage that really struck me as we think of justice as encounter. The author says, "Injustice may be rampant, but it never has the final word." Injustice may be rampant, and it is, but it never has the final word.